Hello, and welcome to Shaking and Sipping. This is the show where we shake up a cocktail or other mixed drink, take a sip, see how it is, talk a bit about its history, and look at some variants. This week, it is really hot in here, so you may also get that added vibe of a overworked bartender in a hot bar with no airflow, really feeling the heat and sweating. So I'm bringing you that this week. We're continuing on our trend of going through the IBA's list of official cocktails, finding out if they deserve a place on that list, looking at different variants of them, their history and whatnot. We're still in the first section, the Unforgettables, and this week's Unforgettable is The Last Word. Now, The Last Word's an interesting cocktail because it is a fairly old one, but which was lost to the sands of time for quite a while until it came back during the early aughts cocktail renaissance. So The Last Word was created at the Detroit Athletic Club. This was a classic fancy athletic club that goes back to the mid-19th century. Fancy, you could do your swimming and your tennis and whatever, and then there were all kinds of restaurants and bars and members only and very fancy. I believe it's still around today. This was created there around 1916. So this drink is often called a Prohibition era drink. Really, it's slightly before that Prohibition era time period, but it certainly carried on through the Prohibition era. Now, it's not really written about, as far as we can tell, other than some mentions on their menu earlier, until Ted Saucier's 1951 classic Bottoms Up. Now, the proportions we are going to use for the IBA spec, as well as the proportions made famous by the drink's renaissance, which was by Murray Stinson, who's a very good bartender, who's famously here in Seattle at the Zigzag Cafe. That was about 2004, 2005 that he rediscovered the drink, put it on the menu, and then it saw fairly wide traffic on the blogosphere and in more modern books, etc. So we are owing our lineage to him, so thanks for that. I know we haven't visited the Zigzag Cafe yet on our IBA in real life, but maybe that will change at some point. We're going to be doing 3 different variants of the drink today, but first let's talk about what the IBA variant is. So it is an equal parts drink, and equal parts drinks are always fun because it really takes some balance to find the right spirits and other mix-ins to make sense in that, especially when it's more than 1 or 2 things. And so the heart of this drink is going to be green chartreuse. Green chartreuse is an amazing liqueur from France, has a long history. They claim back to 1605. That's questionable. There was a thing being made by some monks in 1605, and they claim that it's the same basic blend of 130 herbs. It's probably not really true. It was reformulated to some extent in the early 18th century, 1737, I believe. And then this formulation that we have today dates from 1840. So not quite 1605, but still an old spirit. It's a really interesting liqueur. Like I said, about 130 different herbs and other botanicals therein, and it is proofy. So this is 55% alcohol, 110 proof. So that would be fairly high for a whiskey or something. It's very high for an herbal liqueur. It's a really cool product. I'm sure we'll use it again, as well as the yellow chartreuse variant. It's a fact that everyone knows, but I do think it's fun. It's the only example of it I know of. The color chartreuse, that shade of green, is actually named for the beverage rather than the other way around. So if you've ever seen something that is chartreuse colored, you owe it to this little guy. So equal parts chartreuse we've talked about before, equal parts gin, a dry gin preferably, equal parts maraschino, only Luxardo for me please, and then equal parts lime juice. And that is all it is. No garnish or anything. We're just going to shake that up and serve it. Then we're going to look at 2 variants. One is just a sort of proportions variant and a garnish edition, which I'm curious about for a number of reasons. And then one is something else that I'm just very curious about that I haven't tried, which is a strange, in my mind, swap for the chartreuse. So that is leaving out one variant. One thing I should cover before we move on, probably the most famous variant of The Last Word is the Final Ward. And this is a drink made by Phil Ward, who's one of the major mixologists over at Death & Co. Death & Co., a fantastic cocktail bar. And this book, they've had some since, but this is one of their earlier ones, one of my favorite cocktail books. I'd highly recommend it. It's both got great cocktails in it as well as really informative thoughts on setting up your bar, what spirits you need, all about glasses. Just a fantastic book. Highly recommend it. Even though they have Beefeater as their rail gin, and many people, most of them me, feel like that's a mistake. All right, so for variant 1, the IBA spec, let's just throw everything in. It's equal parts, so it's pretty easy. We're gonna start with gin. You want a fairly assertive London Dry. I think Tanqueray is a nice choice here. We want both of this and everything else 3/4 of an ounce. That's about 22.5 milliliters. Then we're gonna add in the star of the show, the green chartreuse, or chartreuse vert, if you wanted to be French about it. Then we're going to add in the Luxardo Maraschino. Other Maraschinos are available, but they do not get a spot in my home bar. Again, 22.5 milliliters on each of these. And then finally, we need the same amount of some lime juice. These limes at least are a reasonable size, unlike the lemons that I get to struggle with often, but they are really, really junky. These have some terrible looking skins on them, and I don't know why I'm living in a citrus drought here, but I am. All right, and 22.5 milliliters of the lime juice. That's all we need. We're gonna grab some ice and give it a little shake. All right, we have a big and some little cubes going in. Here we go. All right, and then the IBA just says chilled cocktail glass. I'm gonna use a Nick and Nora for this. I quite like the look and feel of that. And we're just gonna pour that in. Love the lush lime. And no garnish on this one, just as is, 4 equal parts of something. That is an IBA spec, last word. Let's give it a try. Oh. Okay, so that is absolutely delicious. There's so much going on. Let's check the nose again. So on the nose, it's citrus, but it's complicated citrus. So some of that chartreuse is coming through, but it tastes like just a rich citrus. Then as you drink it, you get the acidity of the lime juice and the sweetness of the maraschino. And those are kind of what's leading the flavor profile in my mind. I've got a bit of a cherry thing, I've got a bit of a sour thing, a sweet thing. And then all that chartreuse, as well as the gin botanicals, it's just a super complicated set of things happening mid-palate. Yeah, there's a little bit of bitter herb, there's a little bit of anise, there's a little bit of a vegetal note. All that just happens, and then it fades out, and you're left with just kind of that dark herb, almost an anise, something in that sort of family, a wormwood maybe. Yeah, just a delicious cocktail. It's fun because it is very bright and fairly refreshing, but also really complex, and it's a liquor bomb, right? Between the gin at 47% and the chartreuse at 55%, this is a seriously dangerous one because it is bright, fun, summery, and almost pure alcohol. All right, moving on to the first variant. Several times on this show, I've cited Difford's Guide, which is a great online resource of cocktail recipes. And Difford's recipe for the last word is not an equal parts drink. And I find that curious because I think it works so well as an equal parts drink, and that's part of what it's sort of famous for doing. So I'm really curious to see how that's going to shift this balance a little bit. So we're going to use all the same ingredients, just going to change how we're putting it together, and we're going to add a garnish. All right, so starting off, we're going heavier on the gin. We're going to start with a whole ounce or 30 milliliters of our London Dry gin. Then we are going to cut back on the chartreuse to 2/3 of an ounce, so about 20 milliliters. Same with the Luxardo, back to 2/3 of an ounce, about 20 milliliters. And same finally with the lime. Milliliters. Now the one other difference here is that he then calls for the addition of either 10 milliliters of water or to shake using wet ice. And wet ice, if you're not familiar with the term, is exactly what it says on the tin. So that is ice that you have run water over and then drained before adding it. That makes it melt quite a bit faster. You get additional dilution. I'm not entirely sure why we need additional dilution since we didn't in the equal parts drink, and if anything, the gin is the least assertive thing in this mixture, so dialing it up, I don't see why we need to bring the dilution up as well, but we're gonna try it, and I am gonna go with the wet ice method, because we haven't done that before. So let me grab some ice, wet it, and I'll be right back. All right, we've got some nice wet ice here. Let's see how she shakes up. And here we go ahead and strain into a coupe. Now we are going to do a small garnish on this one. So first we want to express some lime zest, which is not going to be very expressive because this lime is terrible. Oh my goodness. I mean, we'll do what we can. And then we need 1 maraschino cherry. And I'm going to use a fork here to not get any juice in, even though I normally like a little bit of juice, but we'll go with that. And this is the Difford's Guide version of A Last Word. Wow, it's very different for a couple reasons. It's not nearly as assertive. The gin is actually very present now, which makes sense because we upped it, but it's really taken over the drink a little bit in a way that I'm not super excited about. The lime's not really coming through. I can still get it on the nose, but I don't get it as much on the palate. I've got the maraschino and the gin working together, as well as the cherry in there in a fairly sweet yet junipery and cherry thing. And the chartreuse is just there filling in holes in the palate. I don't hate this. If this is what I was served for the first time as a last word, I'd say it's a good drink. But compared to this, which is so bright, zingy, sweet, while still having a whole bunch of botanicals going on, this is just a better drink. Sorry to Simon Difford, but this is better. All right, it's time for the final variant. This is called Next to the Last Word. Found this on Difford's Guide as well. And this one I had never heard of anywhere else, and I just found a very interesting idea. So again, to me, this cocktail is really a chartreuse cocktail. Like, even though I found that the lime and maraschino are what I get first, this is filling in all the holes. This is giving me that backbone of the drink. This is what I'm thinking of in this cocktail. What if we didn't have any of this? What if we instead brought in Saint Germain, or as they probably want us to say, because they try really hard to pretend that they're an old French company, even though they're really not, Saint Germain. What if we used this in place of the maraschino, and we used lemon in place of the lime? So Saint Germain, if you haven't had it, this is an elderflower-based liqueur, so much fruitier than chartreuse, much lighter as well. This is 40 proof, 20% alcohol versus 110 proof. So just a very different flavor profile. The only flavor descriptions on the recipe online was that it's a more floral riff, which this is floral. I said fruitier, and it is sort of brighter and sweeter in that way, but it is based on elderflowers, not elderberries. So it is a floral set of flavors. Sounds interesting. What else was crazy to me is this is going back to our original proportions. This is an equal parts, 22.5 milliliters of each spirit and the lemon. So let's see what the heck this tastes like, because I'm very curious. For this one, I'm also going to swap over to Aviation. It's a little bit milder of a gin, a little bit more floral in its botanicals. I think without that chartreuse to play with, this actually will be a pretty decent choice. We shall see. Right, so 22.5 milliliters, 3/4 of an ounce of the Aviation gin. 22.5 milliliters, or 3/4 of an ounce of the Saint Germain, or Saint Germain. The same with our Luxardo Maraschino. And finally, of our oversized lemon. Yay. Which this week I did bow to necessity and bring out the Reamer juicer instead of having to fight with this in the citrus juicer. Alright, let's get our 22.5 milliliters of that. Looks good. And that is all we need. I'm going to get some dry ice, not the dry ice kind, but the ice that's dry kind, and we'll give it a shake. Alright, ice in, let's shake it. And we're going to again strain that into a coupe. And for this one, that lemon juice looked fairly pulpy, so I'm going to go ahead and double strain. Wow. That fill is not ideal in this coupe. I should have called an audible and Nick and Nora glass for that, but oh well. And for this one, we do call for a garnish, but again, we call for a lime garnish, even though we switched the drink to lemon, which I found kind of strange. And this is gonna not come out well again because this lime is garbage. Wow. Yeah, apologies. That's just not what you want in your life, but that is what you have. Alright, let's just toss that in there. Alright, this is the next to the last word, the Saint-Germain-based, lemon-based last word. Wow. Yeah, it's totally different. It's not as good. It's very floral. So the Saint Germain is coming through, even though it's quite a bit weaker, quite a bit thinner of a spirit. It is very floral, and that is actually taking over most of the mouth for me. So the maraschino is adding sweetness, but it's really not adding maraschino flavor. The gin's there, but it's aviation. I went softer deliberately, so it's more botanical, just hanging out there on the tongue. Saint-Germain is given free reign. Yeah, to just go through everything. It's very floral, a little perfumey, not bad. I think I like it more than the weird proportioned last word we just had. But again, this does not hold a candle to the original drink. It doesn't have that complexity. It's just incredibly floral. This drink actually might have made sense to build in the proportions of that other last word. Then we'd have more gin coming through, less of the Saint-Germain. And I think I'd prefer that. But this is good. It reads floral with almost raisins underneath it, because I've got that sweetness of the maraschino and the leftover botanicals of other things with just a little bit of lemon hit. So it's like flowers and raisins, if that makes sense. Maybe like golden raisins. Flowers and golden raisins. I'm not mad about it, just it's not a last word. All right, thanks so much for coming along with me on the last word journey. This will not, however, be the last word from this channel. We'll be back each and every week with another one of these IBA videos, as well as other videos from time to time. I'd love for you to check out the blog at shakingandsiping.com. We do a write-up on each one of these video drinks, as well as the next day, most weeks, posting what happens when we order this drink at a local bar and if they do any riffs on it, or just info if they make it a lot, etc. You can follow me on Twitter at shaking_sipping for general Twitter type content. Be sure to come back next week where we make one of my favorite drinks and the drink that got me interested in mixed drinks and cocktails in the first place, and why we didn't make the final ward, because it features rye whiskey, as does the final ward. So, come back next week for that very exciting and important to me drink, and until next week, happy sipping. Cheers.